All right. Hello, everyone. How's it going? I'm Brendan Uegama. Thanks for joining on this, and thanks to the Canadian Society of Cinematographers asking me to do this. It's gonna be fun. I'm gonna get into a bunch of things: color contrast, cinematography in general. We'll do a Q&A. You can ask questions, but first I'll start with going through a few things to do with color contrast and where I'm at in my career and that kind of thing. A little about me. I am a cinematographer, obviously, and been doing this for a little while. The last few projects have been um, shows like Riverdale, Chilling Adventures of Sabrina, the Child's Play movie, Katy Keene, and most recently I was working on a pilot in New York that was actually shut down because of the pandemic that we're all currently going through. And that was called Brides, and that was a vampire show that hopefully when this is all done, we can go back and finish the pilot, but we'll see what happens. Yeah, it's been a crazy time with everything with the pandemic and how it completely shut down the industry. How people are, the world is completely uplifted, and we have to, as creative filmmakers, cinematographers, artists of different types, where for me, like being a cinematographer, I work only on set all the time, and I haven't stopped working for a very, very long time. And now I'm at this new point where I can't be on set and we can't shoot, so I'm trying to find different ways to keep creative conversations going and keep things moving. And I think it's important for everyone right now to be doing that, for all filmmakers and cinematographers and photographers and artists, to be able to create your own creative outlet and educate yourselves right now at this time within our fields of interest. So for me, I've been doing a lot of like listening to different podcasts, um, doing talks like this, or doing Q&As on my Instagram live. And I think that's important. I think people should be doing that. Read those books that you never had the chance to do before. And, listen to, there's so many great places to listen to great podcasts. The CSC is doing it. The ASC does it. One of my favorite podcasts that I listen to is called the Go Creative Show, where they talk mostly with cinematographers, a little bit with production designers sometimes, and I think some directors, but it's great, and I think that's a really good thing for everyone to do, is keep taking all this in, so we don't just, sit around and don't learn. Right now we have more time on our hands to learn than we've ever had, at least I have. So I think going out and taking photographs and just always trying to do something to keep it going, keep that creative mind sharp. It only helps us when we come back to filmmaking, when we get back to being on set, which we all hope is sooner than later. But yeah, I mean, so for me, so what I'm going to do today is mostly get into the topic of color contrast, and I'll talk to you a little bit about how I incorporate color contrast into my images, my shows, and how important I think it is, as well as we can obviously talk about cinematography in general and different things that whatever. I'll open up a Q&A eventually, and we can just really get into that. But color contrast is important. It's I think in general, when we start to think about contrast, we think of tonal contrast. We think of, like light to shadow and that kind of thing, where, we play with silhouettes and that kind of thing. Which is great, but I mostly like to try to first think of, when I'm in prep at least, first think of color contrast and how I can start to incorporate different colors into my shots and my scenes and my locations, and work with the production designer and the art director to kind of, build that in from the very start, because that's where it's the strongest, is when it's a full when every department's coming together to make this and to work on the same page. So I think, yeah, I mean, I think usually we start to think of tonal contrast, but when it comes to color contrast, there's many ways to do it. And, I like to think of, there's the most basic sense, I think, or maybe not the most basic, but the first thought is usually like a warm to cool contrast, where it's just like, how does it feel? Is it warm, or like warmer, more romantic light next to a cooler, cold, nighty color? And that's usually where, for the most part, where things, I think, start for me. But at the same time, you can start to get a little further into that once you get, depending on the locations and the set design, you can get into a little more of like, primary color contrast, or like neon color contrast, and just playing around with different elements that are in there. And it can also not just be done with, lighting. It can be done with set design, where you can talk with your production designers about making sure that you're getting these separations that you're looking for and hoping for, and going that way. For me, I like to use a lot of bright reds and blues and things that really are strong and immediately noticeable, to see that color contrast. For example, like when I started doing the show Riverdale, I came on for season 2, and I was working setting up the show, or setting up the season of that episode, the series premiere, with Rob Seidenglans, the director. And we were talking a lot about like what the show should look like, the season, how we want to honor what we had seen before, but also enhance and, keep it evolving, because that's what a series always does. It just keeps evolving, keeps getting better and stronger for the most part. And that's what we wanted to do, is bring a contribution to it. And we were talking about ways to do it, and we found these comic books that were written by our showrunner, actually. It was an Archie Afterlife, and it was basically, it's Archie and Jughead fighting zombies. And when we were flipping through the book, though, it was beautifully drawn and colored, and it had these very bold, rich tones. And they didn't use a lot of hues. They used just primaries and strong reds coming from a room mixed with like a cold blue through the door. And when we were looking at that, we were like, well, we could start to incorporate this into our show, and really make sure that it feels, comic booky and bold, and something a little different than, a little different. And so we kind of took that and ran from that first episode on to the rest of that season and beyond into the next season. But I think that was a great approach for us, and thinking that way just kind of, it's fun. You get to bounce all these ideas off directors and production designers and your crew, your gaffer, and you're like everyone, just to kind of find ways to make it the best you possibly can. But I started working with, I've always had a thing with color contrast. And I think most cinematographers do, but I think you really have to make sure that you're thinking of it from the start to really make sure it works strongly. So I think what I'll do is I'll talk a little bit about the shows that I've done over the last 5 years or so. Starting with a show called the Romeo Section, which was, we did for 2 seasons. I shot that, that was for the CBC. We shot that in Vancouver, 10 episodes a season. And the Romeo Section was like an espionage noir. I mean, it's about a spy who's trying to figure out the drug trade in Vancouver, and work with someone that he has on the inside, kind of thing, and trying to break this down. So we knew that there was a lot of room in that show for contrast, tonal contrast, and I wanted to make sure that we could incorporate color contrast. And we were able to play a lot of things in silhouettes. We had total freedom from our showrunner, Chris Haddock, and the CBC gave us a lot of, never had any notes about anything. And it was a great way to, to start kind of my run at this. And I set up the show with the pilot of that and did the next 2 seasons. And I think that was a lot of fun. So I have a few images here as well that I'll go through. I'll start now with one. Let's see here. So here's an image from the Romeo section. This is in the pilot episode. I wanted to show this because this one is supposed to be in kind of a dodgy hotel, and this couple here, this guy and her, they're doing a lot of cocaine and drugs and things at this time of the story, and they're don't have a lot of money yet, and they're staying in this, they've locked themselves up in this little dodgy hotel, and the hotel that we were actually shooting in wasn't quite as run down as kind of maybe some of us would have hoped. So I wanted to make sure that the colors that we used in there could help tell that story a little bit. So generally you go into a place like this, you'd see these underground, these lights under the counters here that would, probably be warm. They'd probably be white or warm color. And the lights would just be regular tungsten lights, but I wanted to make sure that it didn't feel that way. So I wanted it to kind of be stained. And we took these lights and we put some, I'm trying to remember, I feel like we put some chocolate colors on there, or some tobacco, but it gave them like this really stained look to their skin tones. And then underneath we use a green, I can't remember if it was a moss green or what kind of green that was, but we use a green gel to kind of help give that color separation for her, between her and the background, but also to kind of make that feeling of just something a little dirtier and nastier than you'd want to actually be in. I mean, you don't really want to stay in a hotel that looks like that, but this is kind of the idea, is that we're trying to create that environment and that world that makes you as an audience feel that way. So, if this light under here were just a standard warm light, the whole tone would be warmer, and it wouldn't be, to me, it wouldn't be as poppy. It wouldn't tell that story as much. It wouldn't have as much contrast, color contrast. So it was important for me to do that and make sure that we could separate everything. This is a shot that clearly has mostly one color in it, but I wanted to bring this one up because it is, this is down on a dock. There's on a dock on the water. There's just this stark contrast between the light on them and the black shadow behind them and the night sky behind them. And the color was inspired because I went down to this dock during the day and at night before we shot here, and I saw the colors that they had, and our production designer James Hazel built like a bunch of, added a bunch of these lights on the dock. I can't remember how many. You can only see one above them now, but there's actually, I think, like 5 or 6 that he put in, and they they were like, the ones that were initially there were just like a regular, they were kind of like a more orangey sodium light than this, and I wanted something that felt a little harsher, a little nastier, something that was a little different. This is Wolfgang, who's working for the government, and then we have Rufus, who is his his inside guy to try and bring him information and that kind of thing. So I wanted to make sure that they would always have these secret meetings. So I wanted to make sure that where they were didn't feel inviting in any way and didn't feel really good. So I changed the lighting palette in there, the color palette in there. We added all these lights to kind of do that. And I just, I like the idea of this black stark contrast behind them. I think, so into season 2, there's a question here, is there any filtration used? The Romeo section, we didn't use a lot of filtration. I think I would put on black pro mist every now and then, but I don't think in this shot there was any. The Romeo section, like when I would use the pro mist, it was generally just in close-ups you know, at certain times where the skin just didn't feel right, and I wanted to kind of take the edge off. But for the most part, this show was kept a little more clean. Other shows, like I'll go on, I can talk about that, but I always kind of stick with Promise still, or sometimes color. But for diffusion filters, it's really just Promise. Okay, so if we keep going through the Romeo section, in season 2, we got into this show, or this storyline that was a film within the show. They were like a movie producer was trying to make this film, and throughout the 10 episodes of the season, we see little bits of this movie, and we probably ended up seeing over half an hour of combined footage when it was all said and done. And it was based in, you know, China during the height of the opium trade. And so we built this set that was this one strip, and this allowed us to really play with this color contrast and just be bold with our tones and not really do things natural. And we were able to kind of get things a little more, you know, we wanted to make sure that the show of the Romeo section felt very different from the movie that they were making in the show, which was called The Seeds of War. So The Seeds of War has this kind of color palette, these overly saturated, rich colors. You know, and this is an example where, you know, the majority of the light is all our moonish light, and we have production design providing these warm lanterns to get that separation and to break it up, to make sure it doesn't feel like, if those lights were all off, the shot would not feel as bold and, you know, maybe as poppy as it does. Here's another shot that we did in this Seeds of War story, using candles a little bit. You can see the color on her skin here is a little warmer and yellower, a little more yellowy, just to kind of pick up this. It's low light coming up. But I think there's like a few different colors. The color on her skin here, the color coming through the back windows, the ambient, of course, and the candles. Yeah, so there's another question here. Justin, do you find you also use Black Promise? Do you use Black Promise to affect highlights and soften them, or more for faces? I do use Black Promise to soften highlights as well. I didn't hear, as you can tell, but often I will, where you get the little halo of light, or it just kind of spreads the light a little bit more and just softens it. I do that, yeah. But usually with something pretty light, like a you know, an eighth Promise, rather than anything too much. And then here we go. Here's another shot inside of here. Just, yeah, playing with this. This is supposed to be a concubine's room, so it's, you know, it's playing with the color red to really tell that story of her area, her world. But yeah, so that was, you know, the Romeo section was a lot of fun for that. It was totally different from things I had been doing before, which were, you know, nothing that really allowed me to go that bold, I don't think. And, you know, the espionage theme was a lot of fun to play with, and playing with contrast like that. I really like that noirish storylines, and, you know, those are types of movies that I want to watch, and shows that I want to watch. But, you know, taking noir to, you know, playing with shadows and things like that they don't always have to stick to that noirish genre, of course. The next show I did after the Romeo section was Van Helsing. And Van Helsing was, you know, it's horror. It's post-apocalyptic, and it's about vampires that have taken over the world. And, you know, people have to kind of hide out and kind of build fortresses and separations so that they can stay safe from the vampires. And it was a dark storyline. So we were able to, you know, I felt we were able to really make things dark and not really have to see everything like as clearly as you might want or think with standard broadcasts. And it was for Sci-Fi Network, and they were great with allowing us to kind of push the boundaries and do what we wanted. Our showrunner on that, Neil LaBute, was you know, very, very encouraging. And yeah, and that show we played a lot with silhouettes and a lot with black, you know, blackness and stuff like that. But unfortunately, I don't have as many images from Van Helsing as I would have hoped, because I can, it's some stuff is scattered on different hard drives all over the place right now. But um, let's see, I have a few images here I can show you that kind of get into color contrast and different things we did there. Uh, so let me just pull that up for a second here. All right, so this shot here, this is a good example of color contrast. Actually, I wish I had the reverse right now of this as well. Um, this shot is in the left here is Vanessa, our lead character. This is supposed to be her daughter, and this is like a deranged doctor who's working, with basically with the vampires. And this is the end of the season. This is, I believe this was the end of the season. This is a um, kind of a standoff between good versus evil. It's kind of what we broke it down to. And we had this really amazing location. We were shooting at this old factory in Vancouver. It had these low ceilings and these grates above. So we were able to push all these lights that were coming down through. And I think this hallway or this tunnel here must have been close to 100 feet. And we would, so we took all these lights and put them through the grates, and they'd be, they're separated. You can see some here, the next one down here. There's ones that are in the foreground that you can't see, and behind our cast. And I have the room with cool, cold light and warm, saturated light, and cold being the evil side, and warm being the good side. So it was a way to really tell that story visually at first glance of good versus evil. But yeah, it's too bad I don't have the reverse, but it was fun because it also really just helps make the image, to me, it helps make the image really just pop, and really have some bold color tones to it. And you can see here on their faces there's a little bit of fill light from this warm to help give them a little separation in their skin tone, so it doesn't feel just one tone on them. Because if you get to do that, sometimes it can just feel a little flat, whereas here you just had that little contrast there with color. It really helps. To me, it really helps. Yeah, so then let's see what else. For Van Helsing, there was, actually, and so with color contrast, there's obviously like, the obvious of different colors like we've been talking about. But I think, strangely enough, if you want to talk about what contrast is, and you think about the juxtaposition of what it is, and it's a juxtaposition between bright and cold, hot and warm, or hot and cool, and many different things, and it can be color and no color. So we did some episodes of some scenes in Van Helsing, and one of the episodes that was all black and white, and that was a choice that the director and I made early on to make sure that it was supposed to take place in 1936, the scene. So we wanted to kind of incorporate these, film practices that they would have had back then. So we shot it 4:3, and composed everything how we thought they would have back in, back in the day. I only have a couple shots here again from that, but this was, I love doing this scene. This whole sequence to me was great. This is actually, I'll tell you a little backstory. In television, you work so quickly and you work based on a schedule, really. And the schedule is what drives, when you do scenes, for the most part, you as a, cinematographer and your director can really help, guide that. But at the same time, you have your 8 days or whatever it is. You got to fit everything into that 8 days. So often you're doing day for night when you don't want to do day for night. And day for night on a TV schedule can be brutal sometimes because, you find yourself starting at 4:00 in the afternoon on a Friday, working till 5 in the morning, and you do that for 4 months. It can be really hard on people, and no one really wants to do that. But when we were doing this scene, this location, the production really wanted us to do day for night, and I really didn't want to do it. My gaffer, I was talking to my gaffer, and he was like, he really didn't want us to do it. And we had these conversations with the production about why we think it could look so much better and be so much better. If this were day for night, these windows just would have been completely, solid black. You'd see no detail out there. You wouldn't have had these light, this contrast here, this light, splashing on the back wall. So we really fought for it, and they allowed us eventually to do this. So we changed the schedule for this scene, and I'm very pleased with the fact that we did and the outcome, and the fact that they allowed us to do that. We had a really supportive team on Van Helsing. It was great. But to me, when I look at this and I think about what it would have been if we didn't, it would have had to have been approached completely different. The entire lighting scheme would have had to have been different. It wouldn't have been just that these windows are black. Then I would have had to find ways to light him here, our main story, and the people in the bed, and it would have completely changed everything. Whereas here, you just pop some light. Basically all I did is, I think we had some, I can't remember, probably some 10Ks up on a lift pushing in, and these practicals, and that's probably it, and maybe a little fill. I can't, that was mostly the lighting. Otherwise, yeah, we would have had to do a full interior lighting scene, and just wouldn't have been the same thing. Another shot from our black and white scene. Yeah, and speaking of doing dark stuff and kind of trying to push boundaries with Van Helsing, there's shots like this one where we play this maybe a minute dialogue between these two characters as they walk from back here up this dark hallway. The story is that they're really only lit with this flashlight, and this is a little bit ambient from the hall that they just came from, and just this one flashlight is lighting the scene. And so I wanted to make sure that it didn't feel movie lit. And I have a hard time sometimes when you see like the edge light on people, and all those things like backlight when it's supposed to be dark, and there's a time and place for that. But for me on this show especially, it just didn't seem to work. So, and I, as well, on the same note, I wanted to make sure that the scene was lit from, not just as if it was from this light, but it was but the same quality of light. So what I ended up doing is working with my crew. I gathered up flashlights, and we actually lit the entire scene, except for that one slash on the background, with flashlights that we would put on sandbags bouncing into foam core, and up in the pipes bouncing into the corner. And even, this is Robin Lindola, my camera operator on the show, even strapped a flashlight to his back that would pop up onto the ceiling, so that it would kind of become a little toppy fill and just kind of do a little bit of work to come back into their faces as he was doing a walk and talk, leading them back. So, I think this is the only time I've done this, but I think it worked really well, because to me, this feels like it's completely natural. Now, I think in this shot, this frame, especially, he's getting some bounce from this light off a wall to help him, and then a little bit for her. But this edge on her, which is very subtle, is one of those bounces, one of those flashlight bounces. So that was a way for me to try to keep things kind of realistic in a way. Yeah, and so a little bit more on Van Helsing, like color contrast. We played a lot with, I always like to mix lights like this, and like this is obviously a very extremely saturated light, and it's not supposed to be any kind of moonlight or anything like that. It's supposed to be this ultraviolet light that would help the characters kill the vampires and keep them at bay. They would surround their locations. This is kind of their safe zone. They got held up in a hospital, and would keep the vampires out, and surrounded the hospital with these UV lights. And so we gave them this color, just to kind of tell that story. So as soon as they went on, we as an audience knew what we were looking at. And you know, if you look inside of here, the same idea. This is our production designer, James Hazel, wanted, you know, in the story, they built this section of this hallway, this between where they would live and the exterior, where they had motion sensors and all these lights that are supposed to be this UV light. And we were trying to find the right gel and different color, you know, right blue gel to put on there. And actually my gaffer, Mark Murphy, suggested trying out actinic lights, actinic fluorescent lights, which are mostly used for fish tanks, you know, and they're used to like go in the water and show, so that if you have tropical fish swimming around, you can really see all the you know, the crazy colors that these fish have. So they use these fluorescent actinic lights to make it really pronounced. But they have the most insane spike to them. Like when you walk through this hallway in person, your eyes hurt because it's just such a vibrant, crazy light. And it looked so good, and we didn't have to gel anything. So we bought a bunch of these fluorescent actinic tubes, and our production designer built these little housings that are supposed to be like homemade. So there's a tin foil surrounding it, and we popped them in there, and that's how we lit all of this, you know, this hall. And that was what motivated the color for here. So then anything we put on our lights, we had to match, you know, we tried to match to this, so that it always looked like it was the same thing. Yeah, so there's a question, the Arri Alexa family or the Red camera, which do you feel has a better response to color contrast? I think they both are, you know, they both do. I don't know if there's one that's better than the other. I think it really comes down to what kind of light you're using, what kind of, you know, what you're building into it, and then how you want to separate it. And it's up to you as a cinematographer on the day to make sure that you're taking that into account for the tool that you have, you know, with your LUT that you've created for your show, and finding ways to get that color contrast. I would never pick a camera, I would personally never pick a camera based on, you know, thinking this one has more color contrast over this one. I pick cameras based on, you know, a variety of things, but mostly just with how familiar I am with it and what I like about it, the characteristics that I like. I mean, you know, red cameras are fantastic. I still like shooting on, you know, on reds. I think they're great. Alexas all the time as well. Alexas are fantastic. So I don't necessarily think that one camera has a better color contrast than the other. And there's another question here. What is it about the ultra primes that attracted them for this project? Look, budget. So that's actually, so Van Helsing and Romeo Section were both done on the ultra primes. The ultra primes I think the ultra primes are really nice. They're just a little slower. They're not 1.9, or they are 1.9. They're not, you know, 1.3 or 1.4. And when I did the Romeo Section, it was a couple things, and budget was part of it for sure. I was going through different things and testing different lenses, and I was looking at master primes. I was looking at, you know, a bunch of options, and the ultra primes. And the ultra primes have a really nice color. They have great contrast. They're fairly clean, but they have a little texture there. They're still kind of soft at the same time. Whereas, you know, the master primes are like the most, you know, they're very precise and they're very clean and non-characteristic, and they're great lenses. They're like some of the highest quality lenses out there. But the ultra primes definitely had a little bit more character to them. And I knew that by going on the Romeo Section with the ultra primes, I could have an entire set of great lenses that I really liked, and not have to kind of, you know, worry about cutting other things out of my budget to make the lenses work, because I really thought these were great lenses. So I used them and fell in love with them, and I used them again on Van Helsing right away without any question. The other thing I really liked about them at the time is that they have, you know, they're small, they're all compact, they're all small, they're all the same size, unless you get into like the 8R, you know, or the 16, or the 180s or whatever. Like, you know, but the main lenses in the middle of the set are all the same size and weight, and they're like 3 pounds or 4 pounds. They're great, and it makes it. And I like to pick lenses. I actually like to have lenses like that are all the same size and small, so that it makes it quick for changes for Steadicam or Mobi, which I mostly do Mobi work now. And they don't have to rebalance everything, and it's not like a big thing. It's just pop a new lens on, put the matte box back on, you're ready to go. So yeah, I mean, I became a big fan of them. And when I did the last pilot I was just doing in New York, I did not end up shooting them, but I tested them again because I thought they might have been a good fit. And that was a decision, nothing to do with budget. That was a decision to do with the aesthetic of them. I ended up going with Leicas and a set of Super Baltars, and we would mix them up for different, story points. But the ultra primes were close on that one as well. I really wanted them, or wanted to test them and like them. So yeah, there's another question here from Andrew on Van Helsing. What tools did you use for exposure? I think, well, on Van Helsing, I was, false color is a big thing for me. Looking at the histogram, a bit, but mostly I work in the false color. I still use a meter from time to time, not as much lately as I was then on Van Helsing, probably a lot more. But really, it's the monitor. 90% of it is just, I look at a well-calibrated monitor in a dark environment, tinted out with my DIT or whoever, and making sure that that it looks how I want it to look. If I know that the monitor is calibrated properly and it's looking right, then I go with it. I don't necessarily try to think of having the flexibility for post too much, because I don't know, that just doesn't really make as much sense for me. But I want to make sure, like when I'm looking at an image on my monitor and I know that that's what I want it to look like, then I'm happy. If I rate it at 500 ISO or 1000 ISO or 1600, then it doesn't matter, because it's not about having the flexibility later. It's about just getting the image that I want. Yeah. So let's see. So anyway, so now so that's Van Helsing. That's Romeo Section. Actually, here's a quick little example. I want to show something back to Romeo Section. It's a video I have here. And this is just a little color contrast story point that I think is interesting. Let me just go share screen here. Okay, so the Romeo Section, one of the storylines, I'll play this properly in a second here, but one of the storylines in this show was these guys trying to rob a container of heroin that's been imported into the port. And the concept, and that's one of the main story points throughout the season, is how they're going to do this. So this guy here, Rufus, and his gang have come up with this plan to do basically like the Trojan horse idea, where they get brought into the shipping yard in the middle of the night, inside of a container already. They get stacked on top of this other container that has all the heroin, and they cut a hole out in the middle of the night when the place is shut down, and jack it all. So here, I'll play this quickly. So as far as lighting, you really only see, 2 colors here so far. And the colors were picked. The colors were picked for a couple reasons, or a couple ways I came up with this color scheme. And one of them was, again, I didn't want it to feel like there was any movie lighting in here, because we're in this little container, so it would feel silly to have like edge lights and things like that weren't appropriately accounted for, kind of thing. So I worked with our production designer, or the set deck came to me with all these options of types of work lights. So it could be like trouble lights or these LED ones, or halogen ones. And my first instinct was to go with the old school warmer halogen style, but then after some thought, I was like, let's use these LEDs, these kind of nastier color, this cooler color, and give that to the guys in the top, in their area, in their container. And when they drop down into the bottom container to steal the heroin, they light up this new light, they drop it down. This is this nice, warm, ugly, harsh color that gives two things. It does a couple things. Storytelling wise, it's the golden color. It's the prize. Is what they're after. But at the same time, and maybe more importantly, what it does is it gives the two containers different colors and different worlds. And knowing that in the edit, from the first frame, whatever one you cut to, by the first frame, you as an audience member, you will automatically know where you are, what container you're in. You don't need to like see anything unfold or see a couple cuts to know if you're in the top one or the bottom one. Just from the tone right away. So it was a way to help kind of give each environment its own world within this one little scene. And I think it worked out really well. I love this scene. I love that. This is one of my favorite episodes of the season. So anyway, so that was that. And let's see, there's a few questions coming in here. Just going to go through some of them. Greg Middleton asking, what color combinations have you tested that surprised you and maybe used after that? It's a good question. I'm going to have to think about that one a little bit and get back to you on that, Greg. So with Leica questions or lens questions, what Leicas am I using, the Summicrons or the Summalex? I use the Summalex. I've never used the Summicrons, but I hear they're really nice. I hear that they have a really nice soft quality to them, but they are slower than the Summalex. So, but the Summalex are fantastic. I love them. From Arthur Cooper, do you change ISO a lot? What would make you do that rather than NDs or lighting? I don't necessarily change ISO a lot. I think I generally will pick my ISO based on a show more than anything else. So like, I've done it where, my base ISO is 500. Like I think on Van Helsing, my base ISO was 500 for any scene that we'd walk into. And every now and then, if it was a really low lit scene like that one, that I showed the example of them walking down the hall, I would probably go up to like 1,000. And I would sometimes do that over lighting because at times, rather than just adding more light, because I wanted to kind of work with less lighting. You know what I mean? Like with that flashlight, for example, I didn't want to bring in other lights that needed more punch. So I would bump up the ISO to help make those ones feel a little more like they're doing more of the work. But then, at times, like, I guess it's all just by gut and like, or whatever feels right at the time. If I'm in a scene and I feel like it needs a little more, I'll bump it up a little bit. But I think for the most part, I pick my ISO per project and kind of go with that. Like the Brides I was just doing, I think my base ISO was 1,000. And then, I think 800 for Riverdale. So I would just kind of let it, for whatever reason I come up with these ideas, I just pick that ISO for the show and stick with it for the most part until needed. Let's see. From, is it Cairo? What considerations do you give to wardrobe when considering color contrast? Do you find certain combos work better than others? When I talk with wardrobe about color, mostly what I'm trying to do is understand what they're coming up with color-wise, unless it's a very specific thing that I've planned out well in advance, then we can talk about it. But for the most part, it's for me to understand what they're doing, because half the time that's been done, a lot of the wardrobe ideas, especially if they're manufacturing wardrobe, that is, they're coming up with that in concept from early on. And so for me to kind of walk into a room, you know, that day or the night before kind of thing, I'll just try to understand what they have in place so that I can then work with my color palette, my tools to kind of give that separation and make sure I'm not getting too close to the same colors that the actors have. But I think as well, it's, you know, it's a conversation. It's a bigger conversation because you want to make sure that your production designer and everyone's involved in that. Uh, and that's mostly when I find when that stuff comes into when those conversations are happening the most is on a pilot or on a movie where it's not, you know, episodic where you're just going from one episode to the other, where you have this like month or 2 months of planning to really kind of figure all this stuff out, and then you can really work those colors. You can get walls painted differently to make sure the wardrobe pops. But you know, once you're like in the middle of a show going, it's really about understanding what they're bringing so that you can, you know, react properly. Jason, do you have examples of subtle or no color contrast that you find work well? I actually brought one shot in to show that. So let me just pull it up. It was from Sabrina. Okay. So here. So this shot here is from the Chilling Adventures of Sabrina. Yeah, I mean, if you look at this, there's like, you know, it's all very warm tones. There's barely any color separation. There's a little bit up here. You can tell this light that was above this header was a little cooler than obviously the fire or these sconce lights. But for the most part, this is all like a very warm tone. And it worked. I think it works. And of course, there's times where everything works and there's no, you know, there's no hard rules to anything. But for this, I really liked it for a couple of reasons. One, this is Mrs. Wardwell in Sabrina's world, and this is part one. This is season one, where she is actually Madame Satan, right? So she's taken over this body, but she comes straight from hell. So this, you know, she has the upside down crucifix. The fire is a big thing for her. So I wanted to make sure that and this is supposed to be her home, her domain, her area. I wanted to make sure that when we were here, it felt hellish and it felt, you know, like it would be somewhere Madame Satan would live. But you could tell, like, if there was a light, there's a little window. I don't think you can really see it right now back here somewhere behind this wall. And if that window had like a blue slash cutting across here, it would help separate them a little bit. It would help make everything pop a little bit more. But you know, you don't always need that. The fire was doing lots. And then, you know, you look at a still image and it's obviously nothing moving. So it doesn't give the same separation as when the camera's moving and when the fire's dancing around and when the actors are moving and talking, that you get that extra separation that you need. So here to me is an example of when not having the color contrast really seemed to work. Best camera settings for shooting low light interior. This is from KC. You know, I think that's when it comes, you're talking camera settings, get yourself lenses that are fast, you know, like a 1.3, 1.4, and higher ISO at that point. If you're talking camera settings, you know, shoot at 1,000. If you have nice clean images at 1,000 or 1280 or whatever, then that'll help. You know, that'll help not need as many lights, and it'll feel like the little lights that you have are doing more work, because they will be. Previs for color contrast? No, not necessarily. I mean, I just, you know, just think about it. I draw. Usually what I do in prep, once I start getting into, once, like, you know, the art department and production design have released set designs, I'll take those and I'll import them into different apps like, what is it? Shot Designer. where I can import the floor plan and I can draw little stick figures or lights. They actually have a bunch of icons that you can place and move around, to use that. And then I can kind of put like a gel on there and say, this will be red or this will be blue, that kind of thing. But for the most part, I actually, more so than that even, I think I draw, just sketch it out. Like I'll use my Apple Notes on my iPad and I'll actually just sketch a drawing of what the floor plan looks like, or take the floor plan that the designer has, and I'll just draw like where I want a light to be and what color I want it to be. And then I'll just send that off to my team if needed. And we can just go from there. I just keep it pretty simple, but it's faster for me that way. At least I can get an idea out in 5 minutes rather than working with software to kind of, just sometimes it takes a little longer. Yeah, Arthur asking, Sabrina was shot, is it wider than 2:1? It is wider than 2:1. It was 2.2:1. So Sabrina, I did not do the pilot episode of Sabrina. I did the next block. So it was like, David Lazenberg did the first block, and then I did the next section. It actually wasn't block shot, but he ended up doing the first two, and then I came on. So I was prepping when they were shooting. But Lee Krager, the director of the first two episodes, really wanted to shoot, Anamorphic 240. And Netflix had, they were kind of back and forth for a while, and it was going to be 240. They wanted 2:1, went back and forth, and they settled on 2.2, which is, pretty close to 240. So it was great though. I mean, it was an amazing format. It gave a ton of ability to, to play with that widescreen format. So yeah, that show was 2.2:1. When I did Katy Keene, we did that's when we did 2:1. It was on Katy Keene, which I'll get into in a little bit. Let's see what else we have here. In a scene like Sabrina, how do you go about choosing your white balance to achieve that look? From Stuart. Well, I don't really, for white balance wise, I mean, for color temperature of my camera settings, I usually kind of pick a couple of colors to start from. Like I'll say either like all interior work is 3,000 Kelvin and exterior work is 6,000 or whatever it is, or 5,000. And I'll pick that for the show and start there. And then sometimes, if I'm looking at it, I want to warm it up a little bit more or cool it down or whatever, then I can play around with the Kelvin. And I usually just do that by just eye and what I think looks good to what I want it to be like. But again, like I was saying, I guess with the ISO, each show I do, I kind of pick those values that I stick to as a starting point for every scene. So meaning that when we get to a new set or location, my camera department turns on, as they turn on the camera and the DIT, as they're setting everything up, they know where to start the base. So they set the camera to, 800 ISO at 6,000 Kelvin because we're outside, or 3,000 Kelvin because we're inside, or whatever it is, that kind of an idea. It was interesting though, actually, when I did the pilot, I was just doing the brides, was I picked 4,500 Kelvin as a starting point for everything, day exterior, night, or day interior, day or night. It was kind of like I found like it just gave, I wanted the exterior to be a little cooler all the time, like the day work outside to always be a little cooler. So I kind of started with 4,500 because it just kind of kept it a little bit more in that blue on their skin tones and just cooler. And it was just the first time I'd really done that as a starting point. Now we only got, halfway through our episode before we got shut down because of the pandemic. But yeah, no, it started to work really well for us. Let's see here what do you like up in the grid when in set? You have a fixed set. sorry, I'm just trying to read. Cody has a comment here. What do you like up in the grid when in a set? You have a fixed set where you use soft boxes in the Sabrina set. In that Sabrina set, no, there's no soft box. You know what, for me on sets, most sets I build with some sort of a box above them that I use 10% of the time. And that's because I don't really like, for a lot of the shows I was doing, I didn't really like that toppy look. And I don't like the idea of walking into a set, turning on lights and going, because, then you're not really lighting the story of that scene. You're just lighting the environment as a general basis for everything, like not taking anything else into account. So I always have those up there when I need them. I turn them on just to get a little extra ambient, or just to pick up the walls a little bit more or something like that. But for this set, I think we probably rigged a light mat up there above the fireplace, just to kind of give a little glow. Actually, I don't even think we put any boxes in this set, because the set was a fairly small set, came in a little later. So I think here we just, this one would always come down to rigging. And speaking of like soft boxes on lights or on sets, I like to have ceilings in my sets, because I like to always have the camera kind of low. And, it's funny because like on the last show on Katy Keene, when I was doing Katy Keene, it was a tough discussion with our, with our designer to make sure that I had enough ceiling panels, because I wanted them on every set. And for whatever reason, I don't know, they I guess from other shows they've done, she didn't think that they were needed, because, she didn't feel like we would see them all the time. And I just kept having to fight to have them made and brought in, and they would, of course, as I made sure that they understood that. But, having ceiling flats or having lights rigged above only work when there's no ceiling in, of course. So that's why for the most part, I always keep, I use those very little, and I keep ceiling flats in. And sometimes I actually light through a ceiling flat. Like if I have a ceiling flat in, I'm seeing just like the back half of the room, but there's a flat above me, and I want to get a little glow. I can turn the daylight on above, just to kind of give that separation. I just turn it up an extra 10 points, taking into account the soft ceiling. But yeah, so what else? What were the thoughts behind choosing Red over Ari for these various shows, VFX? Well, no, I don't, I mean, so I had started with, using reds a lot. And when I was doing the Romeo Section and then Helsing, the reasons were actually because of movies and gimbals. I wanted, and that was before I think the Romeo Section was before the Mini, or at least I had never worked with the Mini at that point. But, I wanted a small camera that could work on a gimbal. We needed a small camera that could work on a gimbal. So that was a huge part of leaning towards it. And then when I got into Riverdale, they had used the Alexa on season 1. So I kept the same package going. We had an Alexa XT and a Mini, and then I switched over to just Minis all around after the second season. Which I brought onto other shows like Katy Keene, we were just Minis, and Child's Play, we were just Minis. But but like at the same time, when I did the Katy Keene pilot, we were working with Panavision, and we shot DXL2s, which are Red cameras. It's made by Red with Red guts. It's basically a helium, and it was a fantastic camera. I loved it. So, a lot of things go into you. Like, I think the way I come up, and I think most cinematographers come up with what camera package they're going to use, it usually comes down to comfort of what you know and what you like. And then it comes down to, maybe it is like the size, for me on Romeo and Van Helsing, it was the size I needed at that time. so I went with the small red dragons. Whereas when I was doing Katy Keene, that was we just did Steadicam, so it didn't matter about size. I went DXL2, and because I wanted the large format, and so we shot DXL2s with Primo 70s that we had tuned. We had tuned to kind of represent something that was a little bit older, more classical for Panavision lenses, like their System 65 lenses. But I wanted the uniform of the Primo 70s, which are all like this. They're nice, they're lightweight, they're all the exact same size. Again, what I was talking about before, they go quick, like to mount to, for a Steadicam op to be able to take one lens off and put the other one on and be balanced and ready to go. Having lenses that are all uniform was very important to me. So I had these Primo 70s, and we had Panavision tune them a little bit for us to be what we needed, and that worked out well. Yeah. So what else? Let's see. More questions here. We use live grade on set from Jason asking about the live grade. Most DITs I work with have been using live grade. I have not. Phil asked if I use the Movi XL. I have not actually used the Movi XL. We use the Movi Pro on, for handheld kind of gimbal work, as if it's a Steadicam. But also at times put it on cranes or jib arms, usually just on jib arms, and we'll get like a proper, like an Oculus head or whatever for a crane, bigger crane day. But when I was doing the brides, actually, we had a few shots where we wanted to do handoffs, and we had techno crane shot that would come in, and then the operator would come and grab it and run. We were doing that show with a great camera operator named Larry McConkey, and he had built the system where that was all magnetic released. So you could have the Movi mounted on the techno crane, and then as he would come up and grab it, an assistant would hit a button that would release the magnetic, and he would just run off with the camera. And so we did this, amazing shot that hopefully the pilot gets finished, where this techno crane shot of this big estate, and comes pushing into this woman at the doorway, and then he grabs the camera as she turns and goes and walks inside the house, and we follow her all the way through the house into the backyard, and it's all one shot, never stops moving, and it was fantastic. And the only way we could have done that is with the Movi and this magnetic release. That's why I'm such a fan of having gimbals. Like, you get a great gimbal operator, and like on Riverdale, my camera operator on Riverdale, Steve Deneau, is phenomenal with that thing. He's a magician. He really is. Like, he knows it inside and out better than anyone I've seen work with a gimbal, and he can make it feel like we don't even carry Steadicams on Riverdale. We didn't when I was there. We weren't even carrying them at all. It was really just him running around, and he made that thing work well, and we could just. And the thing I like as a DP about having it is that it gives us the ability to, like, we carry a jib arm all the time. You can always just get your little jib arm shots. You can mount it in the ceiling and have like a camera that's up there, and you don't have to have an operator with leaning out over anything weird or offset. And you can rotate the camera, and you can do pulleys where you can just and you can, these are things you can think of on the fly with having a Movi if you have it as part of your package. Which I love. I love to be able to just like react, There's another question. Okay, so Greg Middleton asking again, the color combinations you've tested that surprise. What are the color combinations I've tested that surprised me? Probably, if I think about that a little bit, I guess what it mostly comes down to is, rather than like getting just like warm to cool, it's more finding what the warm is and what the cool is. Meaning, like, warm for warm on Romeo Section was burnt yellow a lot. We'd use the burnt yellow on tungsten, and it gave this like nasty warm color that we could get, this great separation from. And then with the blue, we could really make sure that we had that, it just felt different and really more of a separation than we had before, than you would have had with just a tungsten light and a cool light. So I think for me, it was just like finding different variations of gels. Like on Riverdale, we would use, our moonlight would be cyan, and we started actually with cyan 90 and moved up to cyan 150, which we would just double up a 90 and a 60 to give us a 150. And that would give that, like, to me, what was a really nice rich color. And we would get that separation that way. And that was probably one that I realized after doing that a lot, how much I enjoyed that color, that deep, rich blue, and the color we could get from that. I'll try to see if I have an example here. Let's see. I mean, this is one. Yeah. So here, I mean, this is so Cheryl Blossom's house. This is exterior. This is actually a real location, not a set, even though that fog is so heavy. I actually think this was a foggy day. I think we were lucky that day. But we had our, we had our light up on a lift with cyan 150, giving this nice background. And then on the inside, obviously she is pretty much all lit with, mostly lit with candles here. Obviously there's a light up this stairwell that's coming down, giving her a little edge. You can see it more in her dress, and over here. But from her face, a lot of it is is actually the candle. And here, when you get up to the close-up, this is pretty much all candle, I think, with this background here being the cyan. So these are like, things as I would go, I guess, Greg, as I would go through them, I would just find like what colors seem to work and I would respond to. And if I responded to that's how I found the cyan 150 for this show was, cyan 90 just wasn't quite, giving what I wanted. And when I doubled it up or added the 60 to it, then it just seemed to really fall into place. From Jeremy, what is your preferred jib for the Movi? I love the Aero jib. I think the Aero jib has been a great little jib. It's small, it's compact, doesn't have cables, easy for the grips to set up, it seems like. And it's great. I mean, I think it's like 9 feet or 10 feet reach, something like that. And it's, we can just carry it and set it up in like 10, 15 minutes and we're ready to go. Pop the Movi on, pop the Movi on there and we're good. On the brides, when I was doing the brides, my key grip, Rob Harlow, he also did the series Katy Keene with me right before that. On Katy Keene, we carried an Aero jib, but in between Katy Keene and the brides pilot, he went out and bought a GFM jib. I can't remember what model number it was, but it's like I think it goes up to 12 feet. It had a cable, a cable system, but it was super strong. They could set it up fairly quick, 15 minutes or whatever. And we used that instead of an Aero jib. And it was good. It was a really good jib. It was brand new, super clean. You could build it down in, I think, increments of 3 feet. Maybe start out 4 feet or something like that, and then you could add 3 feet pieces on, and it worked out. It was good. When you choose, this is from Cody. When you choose your camera rig, have you felt you've been sticking with Steadicam or the Ronin more these days? You just brought up the Steadicam Movi. You know what? I've never used a Ronin, and I'm interested in them. They seem great. And I would love to use one day. But the reason that I've used Movies is because of the operators. It's the same reason that you use a good Steadicam op, is because it's not the tool, it's the operator. So with the Movi, Steve Deneau knows that it's his Movi. He's customized it to his, likings, and he's added, he's upgraded motors and different things that help him for balancing and whatever, and payload, and he's gotten the wheels that he likes and all the different mounting support. So, and he's fantastic with it. If I gave him, if I said, I want you to operate, but I'm going to use a Ronin, I mean, it just doesn't make sense because he would have to relearn a new tool. Now I know the Ronin has a better payload, but does an operator need to run around with the extra 10 pounds or whatever it ends up being? If that's his tool, great. But for what I've done, Larry McConkey on the Brides, that was his tool as well, the Movi and Steady. So we would do on the Brides, we actually did Steadicam when it was just like a walk and talk, or Movi if it was needed for a Movi style shot, which would have been like a handoff or something that was really low to high, or a jib or whatever. We would use the Movi. We carried both full time. Let's see. How do you get rid of, this is from Alex, how do you get rid of the small bump from the magnetic release? I always have that problem. I've started doing a speed rail system instead because the magnetic handoff causes problems. Yeah. So when we were doing that shot I was talking about earlier, we did get the little bump a couple times, and we just, to be honest, we just went again until we got it. It took that shot took us, 5 takes or whatever. Not that it was all for the camera, for different things, performance, the director wanting to go again for different reasons, but as well as camera, making sure that we got the shot fluid that we all liked all the way through. And I think it was just a timing thing to get rid of the bump. It was really just a timing thing. It was like the camera operator had to kind of grab it. And I think the technocrane was still extending as the release happened. So nothing stopped. You could never have one. There always had to be movement. Otherwise you would feel it. Like if the technocrane stopped and then you grabbed it, boom, and you'll definitely feel the bump. But we were still extending, still pickling out as you would grab it and run off. So it worked. It's from Keely. Do you ever play with opposing colors between camera filters and gels on your lights? Examples, throwing a green filter in front of the lens and magenta on your key light. I have not. Personally, I have not. I never, I mean, the only color filters I really put on cameras, I'm trying to think of what we would, like on Katy Keene, we would use gold effects a little bit here and there, and tobacco filters every now and then. But for the most part, it would just be, it's just diffusion on the camera and then color gels on the lights. And I would create that opposing colors just from that. Howard, is there a way to maintain naturalistic skin tones while going for a saturated, aggressive color palette? Or are those two ideas contrary to each other? No, you can definitely do that. You can do that. I mean, I think in that case, in that case, the closer you get your skin tone to, to what your camera color balance is, the more natural your skin tones will be. And then the lighting that you do beyond, behind them and around the set, edge lights, that kind of thing, that can all be done with color on lights, color gels, or RGBs, to give you that saturated palette that you're looking for while keeping a little bit. And I in a way, maybe I don't think as much about like fully natural skin tones, but I think I do that often, where if I'm lighting a scene that is, like blue for the most part, I'll try to always tie in a little bounce or something on the skin tone that is warmer to help kind of fight through that, so you see flesh and you don't, flesh tones, and you see like different colors in the cheeks and that kind of thing, and also helps sometimes with the wardrobe and all that, just to make sure that you're not completely washing away the natural skin tones. Christine, okay, so how to maintain eye lines for actors on reference to Child's Play? Does that mean how to maintain eye lines for actors on reference to Child's Play? So on Child's Play, we had, I should have brought some of those pictures up. We had Child's Play, we had a doll. We had many types of dolls that we would use on set. We had the majority of what we would do with Chucky was actually like an animatronic doll that 4 or 5 puppeteers would work with either sticks for his arms or his legs or whatever, but also remote control for his head, his facial expression, his mouth. It would all be moved by remote. Like the majority of what you see in the movie Child's Play of Chucky is actually us doing it, minus the enhancements of the eyes, which were obviously like full CG eyes to give the light, the iris light. But for the most part, unless he's running or something like that, it was all a group of guys doing it on set. I'm gonna pull up a couple shots and I'll get into the question there. So, okay, so, this shot here, this is Chucky and Andy coming in. Chucky's sitting on his bed, and this is completely, in this shot, it's a oneer. The scene is a oneer. Chucky turns his head. They have a little bit of back and forth dialogue, and Andy leaves. And it's all a practical doll. Like everything about it is a practical doll, except for the glowing eyes. That was the only CG element that we would put in for this, and that was kind of the approach for everything. But back to the original question, more about the eye lines, is that we had this animatronic doll and we had what we would call Stunt Chucky, which was a doll that could be thrown around a little bit more, because this one, I have no idea how much this thing cost to make, but I'm sure it was a hell of a lot of money. You don't want to toss them on the ground. So we had one that wasn't full of robotics that you could throw around. And then we had another one that was more picture friendly for different things. If he didn't want to move, if he was just completely static, when you'd see Chucky kind of in his off position, and if the actors were picking him up and like that kind of thing. So we would play with, so for eyeline wise, we would take this doll or one of the other ones, and even if it was off camera, we would just place Chucky beside us like you would with a normal scene with any actor. You get your eyeline, you place them where you need. If they needed to be a little higher or lower, you kind of raise Chucky up or bring him lower. Rarely ever lower, obviously, but they always had something to look at. And the way that it worked on set is we had a guy by the name of Keith, who was one of our puppeteers, who was the guy who would actually control the mouth moving, the cheeks, and I think the eyebrows, anything in the face, he would control. And I guess the head moving back and forth. And so he would do all of Chucky's lines on set. He said every line that Chucky had, and so he could remote control it and then time it to his mouth moving, so that the actors, Gabrielle and whoever, Aubrey or whoever was interacting with them, could actually talk to someone and something physical that they could look at and have a back and forth dialogue. So it was, bringing Chucky to life was a full thing, full-time thing, big department. But actually, I'm going to go back to that. And let's see. So that's, so Child's Play. I have a few stills I pulled up here, so we can get into some of these. I mean, here's kind of an example of what we were talking about before. Someone was asking about with the skin tones. I mean, there's probably better. I'll find a better example, but this set is mostly lit with this cool color. At least this frame is mostly lit with this cool color. And although the light on the robot head here is cool, is not the same as that. We put a little more, a little less blue into it to kind of make the separation, the color separation between the face here of Chucky and the background here. And of course, the effects filled in the eyes. Here's an example. So this is actually, if you've seen the movie, this shot is, Chucky dragging this knife across the floor as he's walking. This is actually our puppeteers walking him across the floor. No CG in it. Um, this is the opening of the film, the Chasm Factory, where everything starts, everything goes wrong from the beginning. It's supposed to be in Vietnam. It's, and it's this old, or this shitty kind of factory where they make these buddy dolls. And the guy goes out to the, outside afterwards, and he commits suicide and jumps off the top of a building. You only see the impact in this shot in the film. We only see the impact. And the way that I lit this is with real sodium lights. So our production, or between the gaffer, between the electrics and the set deck, we bought something like 20 different practical sodium lights, all of different sizes, from like little 70-watt ones up to like 400 watts or 1,000 watts. And they were all made to have a spud on it so we could put it on the combi stands or however we wanted. And we would place them, like some scenes that we have, I think there was like 15 of them up in a scene. And I did that so I didn't have to, again, add movie lights everywhere. We could just have real sodium lights that we could look at and feel. So here's, one of our lights there. I think this is a bigger one. This is a bigger one that I think we put on a lift coming off the building, or we just stuck it. Yeah, there's a lift behind this building that we put this on. There's other sodium lights peppered around that you don't really see right now in this frame. And then I wanted kind of more of a green, greenish kind of shitty light look on the guys in the foreground here to give that color separation. But I like to always try to, I like to be able to look at the lights, and I like the lights to be able to motivate where it's coming from. So it's not, just like fake movie lighting, which of course you have to do at times. But this was a good example of how I like to incorporate and work with production design to kind of supply some of this stuff. This scene, if you've seen the movie, this scene is in the end at the Z Mart, which is like where the big massacre at the end happens. One thing, as we were kind of coming up with the concept of the film, of this scene rather, between Lars Klevberg and myself and the production designer, Dan Hermanson, we were trying to find ways to like make sure that every section of this Z-Mart had a look and a feel, somewhere where you knew where you were, because we knew we were going to be kind of intercutting and bouncing around. So in this area, which is where, there's a buddy doll, like a bear doll that comes out, we wanted to make sure that it had its style. And what we did is brought all these coolers in. Dan provided all these coolers, and we lined them with lights that we could play with our own different colors. And this was kind of a lavender, I guess. I can't remember the exact gel color that we put on there. And we had a full row of them. And it was obviously giving this color here, and you can feel it here. And that was a good way for us to, like, as we go from here to the front of the store where there's the sodium lights, is actually where we had our like 15 lights in shot that we're pushing in, that we were able to kind of give that color separation and that storytelling color, memory of, so that when we cut to here, we know where we are. We cut back to this, we know where we are. And it was a really successful way. And I always like to do that. I always like to give a room or an area its feel, its color. It's from Cody. When you go in, oh, just deleted. Okay. Is the two guys smoking in the warehouse frame loaded with haze to light the background? Yes, it was. I am a big fan of haze. I use it in everything, every show pretty much. I don't use it in every shot, but I use it in probably 95% of the shots, to different levels. Like in here, there's haze. You don't really feel it as much, but it gives a little texture, it gives a little softness, it just takes the edge off. Whereas here, there's obviously a heavy amount. Here, there's a heavy amount, you can see it, but maybe not as much as that, or it's just the light's a little different. You can still see the haze coming through, the background here, or through the windows here, and from his flashlight. haze there. There's haze in every shot of this movie, I think. But that is, this shot here is what you're asking about, and that is a lot of smoke coming in. Yeah, you can, you can see it. The toughest thing about haze and smoke is, maintaining it so you don't see it moving around. And you do at times, you got to really just have a great special effects team that can help work with you and understand it and understand how it moves and when it, where to, the distances that you want of things and when they come in and top it off. And it takes a while. I think I spent a lot of my early time on haze shows just trying to figure out the best way to do it. And I still think I'm learning about that every day. And, every show is different with every, I find with every special effects team, you got to kind of reiterate how you want it to be. And when I went on to Katy Keene, I guess they hadn't done something that was so heavy, and that department I worked with, they took we had to keep walking them through it day after day, and they were great. They got it down. Let's see. When you go in for an interview for something like Child's Play and it's an established franchise, do you feel you had to match the work before, or could you build something new? For Child's Play, we built something new. I don't think there's really any visual references except for the doll itself. And maybe pretty much that's it. The interview process for Child's Play was a long one. I talked with Lars Klebberg, the director. He's from Norway, so he was in Norway when the interview process started. And we talked for I think for weeks at least. I don't know if it was a month, but it was 2 to 3 weeks of every now and then talking, and just we'd talk about different things, movies that we like, whatever, just references or just conversations about different stuff before he actually offered me the show. And we knew, I don't even think there was much of a discussion of that, because I think right away we knew from the tone of the script, from MGM's perspective of what we had to do with the show, not being able to, it wasn't supposed to ever be a remake of it. It's more of a reboot. It was a complete new idea, new concept on Chucky. He's not like a voodoo doll. He's a AI doll now gone wrong. So there's a whole new world that we were incorporating, and I think we all knew that. Every department kind of knew that as we were going into it right away, that this had its own language, and we wanted to build our own language, and it had nothing to do with the last film. Now, I watched the original Child's Play before. I mean, I'd seen it as a kid a few times, and I loved it actually. And I think when this came around, I watched it again. I think I probably watched it when I had around the time when I knew the first interview was going to happen. And then I don't know if I watched it again until the night before the premiere, where I went over. We were in Malibu actually, and I went over to where Lars was staying with the director. I was living in Malibu at the time. We went over to his house, and we did a big screening. We watched that and then our movie, and it was a lot of fun. But yeah, I think when we were making the movie, we just never really referenced the original. What inspires you? References and influences. Everything, every movie that I like, I find inspiration in. Watching different cinematographers that I look up to and their work and their approach and their ideas and their thoughts, that all inspires me. Filmmaking is such a collaborative effort. There's so many ideas and different elements being thrown at you that can be inspiration. And as you're watching a movie, it could be like the photography, of course, a performance, the way an edit's done, the music. There's so many different things that I get inspired by when I watch films. I mean, I think the answer is I just love movies, and I take the bits that I love about them and let that inspire me into what I do. And of course, still photography as well, and just just life. Traveling, I go around and travel, and I'll find things that inspire me to do. Actually, a good example of that would be that I'll pull up here. When I finished Riverdale and I went to, I had like, I think 2 weeks off or 10 days off in between Riverdale and Sabrina. And I went to Italy. And when I was in Italy, I was going around to different places, seeing all these like amazing churches and different things like that. Oops, that's not what I want. And I found there was this church in Rome that had an open ceiling. Wish I should have brought this one up beforehand. I'm actually going to stop the share. I'm going to find this, and then I'll bring it up. And the way that church was built, or that dome was built, was there's a circle in the middle of open sky, and then it was like rounded, and the light, as the sun would move throughout the day, it would cast the light inside, and it would just move around the space. And when we were doing Sabrina, when I came back for Sabrina, one of the new sets that were being built was the Academy of the Unseen Arts. And when I came back in, I had the idea to kind of incorporate that, because of the travel, because of being there and being so amazed by this place and this architecture and what it meant and brought to, like, how magical it made the space feel in real life. So I when I came back, I was like, well, what if we did that for the Academy, so that we could have this, like, this idea that there's this opening up there that we never really see, that is just, a place to kind of push this light from. So that's what this is. This is a 5K mole beam that's rigged above our set, that was on a pulley system, so we could bring it up, down, move it a little bit to the right, a little bit to the left, and it worked well. I mean, this was one of the main, to me, when it came down to this set, and it was like the way that it would look and feel, this was what drove everything. Where it all started from was this cone of light coming in, and that was all inspired by travel. It was all inspired by seeing the world. What else? Okay. Here from Angel, since you use haze a lot, how does this affect your choice of filters, strength of filters, and choices in general? Good question. Some shows, what I'll do is I'll still leave it in, depending on what else is in the frame, or how close the actors are to the frame, or a bunch of different other reasons. I'll still leave it in. But sometimes you definitely feel it. It's too much with that haze, and you take it out. That's more in the case of bigger environments, I find, or wider shots. When you get into the close-ups or the mediums, you can still get away with it, because you usually focus a little closer, and the haze just becomes background, and that's when it looks the nicest, is when it just becomes kind of that ambient background. But I think for the most part, it's really just when it's I keep them in when we're in the close-ups, the filters still, if it's that filter show, if it's a promo show for me. Okay. How do you emphasize on a character in a scene? Well, if I'm understanding what you're asking, how do you make sure that, which character needs to feel the strongest, or has the weight of the scene? That all comes, that comes in the form of the script to start. Like, for the most part, you watch a film, or you read a script for a movie or a scene, and it's the blueprint to everything. It really is. Like, it tells you exactly who's the leading character, who's winning the battle in the scene, or whatever it is, even if it's like just an emotional scene between two people. And the actors have their job, and come into the scene prepared, and they know who's in, everyone knows who's in play, and who has the hierarchy of the scene, and who the scene's about, and who's diminishing in the scene, even if it's like the more powerful character of the overall show. sometimes they're not the powerful one in the scene, but it's all in the writing. And for me, I just, that just comes out of it, and I'll think about it a little bit, but I think for the most part, you see it unfold in front of you, and it's just how things kind of develop. And I'll place, like, for example, to emphasize that a bit, I might lower the camera a little bit more on one person than the other, play it on a wider lens up a little closer to kind of be more present with them. And then to someone else, to the other person, I'll just be a little more normalized with the height and the lensing, like maybe it's on a 50 mil up close, or where, in a medium shot, and the other one's on like a 35 or a 29 up close, and you just really, the camera's right there and you really feel it. Those things I'll play around with. But that is all just reactions to what I read and what I see when I watch the actor block it out. Someone asked me this the other day. I was doing one of these, and they asked, at what stage of your process do you pick your focal lengths? And I kind of answered it briefly, but I don't really, besides specific shots, like something that's a little weirder, or something a little more stylized. Sorry, my agent's calling me there. Something that's a little more stylized, or where it's like you want a 16 mil up close, and it's going to be this crazy thing with like deep background, or you're going to use a diopter or whatever it is, something like that. Then, for the most part, I would pick my lenses based just on reaction to the day, reaction of watching the scene right there. Okay, so let's see here. So Katy Keene, I haven't really got into yet. So I'm going to pull up some shots of Katy Keene, talk a little bit about that. Katy Keene Katy Keene, I did the pilot for like back in February of 2019. And it is in the Archie universe, as far, it's the same showrunner that I had on Sabrina and on Riverdale, but it's different. Sabrina is a horror. Riverdale is kind of like murder mystery. And Katy Keene is based a lot more in reality. It still has this kind of like, you still want to make sure that it feels of the brand of what Roberto is in a way, but it's not so far-fetched or such a genre show. It was more based in reality. So I wanted to make sure that it kind of felt different. And part of what that was for the director of the pilot, Maggie Kiley, and I, was finding a look that had, we were looking at many different things, and we ended up landing on something that was very warm. We wanted a lot of movement and fluid. We wanted to feel inspirational all the time, because it's about these 4 characters living in New York trying to make their dreams come true. And so we wanted to make sure that kind of breath of energy was felt in the pilot. So we moved the camera a lot. We were very fluid. And the color palette was never depressing or down. It was very bright, or very, maybe not very bright, but very warm and saturated. And we kind of went with a very warm skin tone show overall. So here's a few shots. I'll pull up a few shots from Katy Keene here. Let's see here. All right, so this is, here's Katy in her apartment. This is actually not the pilot though. This is the series, because this is our set, and this is a translite outside here. Whereas on the pilot, we did it with, we shot at a real location, and a production designer built it to match. But you can see her skin tones here, very warm. Our LUT that we created was very warm, so we had these lush color. Like this scene here is supposed to be just pretty much all daylight coming in, and this is kind of how we played the majority of our daylight. It felt in this world, this hue on the skin, so very lush, very warm. I played around with color contrast for, this is the same location, different scene. Oh, maybe it's the same scene. But, we warmed up, you can feel it here, and we would make sure that the skin tones would always be nice and warm. And here's something outside, again, making sure at nighttime, this is in a little alleyway, and making sure the skin tones are very warm, motivated, with color separation behind them. But of course, as we go inside, I play. So here's like an example of playing with color contrast. That's not natural. That's definitely more in a theatrical way, and more RGB, like primary reds and blues, and we were able to kind of create this great separation for this character here, Ginger. This is the opening shot of the pilot. We're on a crane, we're pushing into this window. This is down in the Lower East Side of New York on a Thursday night, which was very difficult to kind of control. It's supposed to feel like a low rent area, and it's a flashback to Katie's past when she's a little kid. And this was the only scene that we wanted it to feel a little more saturated than normal, because we wanted her memories to feel, different and full of color and hope. Because in the story, her mom has passed away, so we wanted to make sure that that her memories were full of life and these bold colors. So we went with this interior, very warm, inviting kind of look that you see in the window here, and then the exterior went with this extra saturated kind of blue light. And I placed little lights in the stairs up and down the block. You can see some in here and different places, and we had atmosphere and cones of light that were just pushing, or of atmosphere rather, pushing around. But yeah, this is, I think, the third floor of this building, and we had our crane just pushing. This is probably the wider part of the frame, and then we just pushed into the window. But Katy Keene is such a fun show to do. Yeah. So, anyways, that's Katy Keene. We shot Katy Keene in 2:1. And we did the series. So we shot the pilot. We shot the pilot of Katy Keene on the DXL2, but we shot the series with master anamorphic lenses on the Alexa Mini. And we changed houses. On the pilot, we were with Panavision. When we did the series, we were with Keslow Camera, working with Keslow through TCS. It was kind of a deal that, because there's no actual Keslow house in New York, and I have such a good relationship with Keslow Camera. I've been working with them for years, and Leslie for years, and some of the people there, even when it was Claremont back in the day, and before Keslow bought out Claremont in Vancouver, that I wanted that relationship. I wanted that kind of the familiarness that I had with them, even when I was in New York, someone that I knew and trusted, because I just didn't know any houses out there except for Panavision. And since we switched, I wanted to make sure I was with someone I knew. And Keslow helped out, and they worked with TCS, who was fantastic. Eric at TCS and the team there made it really easy as well. Anyways, but that was so this frame here that you're looking at was shot in the series. So this is with the master anamorphics. The master anamorphics are by far, in my mind, the nicest anamorphic lenses when it comes to not having a very characteristic lens. There's old anamorphics that will flare like crazy and give you all these distortions that are amazing. And we use them a few times here and there throughout this, and I've used on other shows. But on this show, where it should have been clean, these lenses are just precise. They're so well built. I think they're amazing. But yeah, I mean, this, like, you have the sun right down the middle here, and there's like, these are master anamorphics. There's like no flaring, no kicks of light. And that was a good thing for us, like no distractions from optical imperfections. Anyways, so that's that. And then what else is there? I actually wanted to show one thing about Sabrina before. I think we'll wrap this up pretty soon. But before I get off, I wanted to show this because I like it. So this is in episode 5 of Sabrina, where we go into this kind of nightmarish world. A sleep demon takes over the Spellman household, and is kind of trying to, she's basically, the idea is she's able to get into everyone's dreams and control them. Let me see here. So the idea, and this actually gets to color contrast as well. So the idea of this episode was to give, once we went into these dreams, we gave the characters a specific color. And this again is what I was talking about before with understanding, being able to go to somewhere and understand exactly where you are. So we gave Helga's dream this yellow color that you see here. We gave, oh my God, the other aunt's dream this purple color, and we gave Sabrina this bright red, which I don't know where it is right now. But the idea was that as you're intercutting throughout the scene, and as the sleep demon is going throughout the episode and going through dream to dream to dream, you know exactly where you are. So we had these purple light. As soon as you come into her place, you knew it was a purple light here, or you knew whose dream you were in. And we had a blue for his light, for his nightmare, Ambrose. We had this amazing Maggie Kiley, the director of this, who I've worked with a ton, did the pilot of Katy Keene and The Brides. But we had this, I'm going to show this little clip here. This was this really neat one where you kind of go, as the nightmare evolves, it's like for the character Ambrose here, layers are kind of being uncovered and kind of evolving throughout the shot. And we wanted to do the scene in a oneer where you kind of see something change. And I'll just play it first. So we had a little techno crane. We were on a stage, so we didn't have a ton of room. So here's Ambrose looking normal with this body in a body bag. Now the camera's past him, is pushing in on this, which I don't think you really see, or here's a stereo in the story. Music kicks in, triggers his dream in a different way. Now we start to pull back. All we realize as an audience is the dream's evolved. The body's out of the body bag. It's spliced open. He has tools, different things going on here. And he goes in and, goes to how the dream evolves and where it goes to. And it was a really, really amazing shot. And this shows you how it takes a village to make a movie. Like if you look at this, this is on the smallest example. We have here's our crane, or different people working on the pickle and the bucket. We have set deck guys underneath, or props people underneath who are handing off under the table, hand things off to him. If you watch the show a few times, you just see the shot a few times, you see different people popping out, doing different things. And we had to rehearse this so many times to make sure that everyone knew where to be, when to be, and how to make sure it all worked out. Like this thing coming in here, marked on the ground. We had to figure out ways to slip his gloves on and the tie over his head to make it quick, so that it could all happen within the 10 seconds before we revealed him again. It was a fun shot. Dreamt up. That shot was dreamt up by Maggie, our director. She's awesome. Very visual. Okay, so. All right. So one last question. I'm going to get, this is going to be the last question I answer here before I sign off. This is from Cairo. How did the DP colorist try to match your pilot for the series? With different cameras and stuff. I shot the pilot and then I came back 4 months later to shoot the series. So it was still me, same colorist and everything. We just had new cameras and lenses. And what we did is we just kind of, there are minor tweaks in between as far as like the color palette that they could represent. So we just worked with them to kind of make sure it all felt continuous. And I think it did. But by me being the guy who did the pilot and the series, I think it definitely helped. All right, so that's it for me. And that was a lot of fun. I'm glad. I hope you guys enjoyed it. I hope you come back next week for the next one, which is with Catherine Lutz and Guy Godfrey, who will do it next week. If you ever want to follow more about my work, You can follow me on Instagram. It's just my name, @Uegama. I post on there quite often. Keep checking back with the CSC as they do this. Watch other podcasts, listen to other podcasts, watch, cinematographers talk, different things that can keep you going and keep you creative throughout this time. Thanks, everyone.